Hello and welcome to the Port of Los Angeles March media briefing. Supply chains are navigating increased uncertainty right now, and with these monthly updates now in year 7, our aim is to offer data, analysis, and insight into where global trade is headed. I'm Philip Sanfield, the Port's Communications Director, and with me is Executive Director Gene Seroka. Good morning, Gene.
Hello, Philip, and welcome, everyone. A lot's happened since we met a month ago. Military strikes in the Middle East, a Supreme Court ruling on tariffs, and the annual Trans-Pacific Maritime Conference here in Southern California, with more than 4,400 delegates in attendance. We'll start today, as usual, with February's cargo data. Then, to discuss all of this, we'll be joined in studio by our special guest, Ron Widdows. Ron brings a unique perspective. He's the former CEO of Neptune Orient Lines and served as chair of the World Shipping Council for more than a decade. Ron currently serves as the chief executive of FlexiVan Leasing, a leading U.S. intermodal chassis provider. And as always, we'll leave plenty of time for your questions. But first, let me take a moment to recognize that March is Women's History Month. Here in Los Angeles, under the leadership of Mayor Karen Bass, women serve on our Harbor Commission, our executive team, and represent 1/3 of our Harbor Department workforce. Nearly 40% of our engineering staff are women. That's double the national average. And they're helping us design the infrastructure that keeps America's trade moving forward. But this progress extends beyond our gates. Across the maritime and logistics industries, from the docks to boardrooms and everywhere in between, more women are stepping into leadership roles and technical careers than ever before. It's no secret this has long been a male-dominated field. Today, talented women are changing that by choosing careers in the supply chain, technology, engineering, and public service. This month, we celebrate their impact here at the Port and throughout the global trade community.
Thank you, Gene. It's great to see that shift happening. Now, let's turn to our February numbers and what trends you're seeing 2 months into the year.
Philip, we handled about 824,000 20-foot equivalent units, making it our second busiest February ever, trailing only the pandemic-driven spike that we saw back in 2022. That's about 3% higher than last year and 11% above the 5-year average for February, both positive signs. On the import side, we handled 434,000 TEUs in February, 5% more than last year and 14% above that 5-year average. Some of that strength reflects the annual pre-Lunar New Year rush when importers pull forward a little bit more cargo before factories shut down in Asia. Meanwhile, exports came in at 117,000 TEUs, 7% higher than last year. That's an uptick from recent lows, but we still have a long way to go to strengthen American agricultural and manufacturing exports. Over on the side of empties, we handled 274,000 TEUs, down 2% from last year. That aligns with the current demand as carriers continue repositioning equipment back to Asia during our traditional slack season. So, 2 months into the year, the Port has handled about 1.6 million TEUs, steady cargo movement. While that's 5% lower than last year's elevated start, which was driven by pre-tariff shipments, we're still slightly ahead of the Port's 5-year average. That puts us in solid position heading into that slack season as we wrap up Q1, which most industry experts evaluate in totality, not necessarily just month to month. Asia is just coming out of the Lunar New Year shutdown with fewer sailings and lighter volume as factories begin to restart their manufacturing process. Looking ahead, I expect a volume dip in March, followed by a stronger April, as retailers and others begin their replenishment cycle and particularly start seeing spring and summer fashion cross our docks. The bottom line, even with more trade policy shifts and the events in the Middle East, it's been a predictable first couple of months of cargo flow here in Los Angeles. As we turn to the second quarter, we've got efficient operations, ample capacity, and the world's best workforce ready to roll.
Thanks for that overview, Gene. Before we bring in Ron, what's your takeaway from this year's TPM conference?
Philip, let me start by congratulating S&P Global, the Journal of Commerce, and Peter Tershwell for yet another outstanding conference. TPM was defined by one question: what's next? Right now, very few of us have a clear answer. With so many developments affecting supply chains, from the tariff ruling to broader trade policy shifts and the conflict unfolding every minute in the Middle East, there's real uncertainty across this industry. At TPM, the breaking news from the Middle East dominated conversations. Many of us have friends and colleagues in the region, so concerns about safety and security were front and center. On the business side, discussions focused on rising energy prices, particularly bunker fuel that powers most of these container ships. But from a cargo standpoint, most manufacturing flows serving the United States, Europe, and Latin America are continuing to move. We're monitoring the situation closely, but we're not seeing disruption for U.S.-bound cargo right now. What I heard loud and clear from carriers, retailers, and logistics providers is that planning horizons have shortened dramatically. Companies are hesitant to make long-term commitments until there's more clarity on policy and geopolitical developments. That's important because TPM typically kicks off the Trans-Pacific contracting season when shippers and carriers negotiate their rates and services for the coming year. Those talks largely paused for a while as everyone tries to understand where prices and volume may land. That's what made TPM so valuable again this year, the timing. With so many decision makers in one place as these global events unfolded, the industry was able to talk through what comes next together.
Thank you, Gene. A perfect lead-in to our guest. Would you please introduce him?
It's my pleasure, Philip. Ron Widdows is one of the most experienced voices in global shipping. As I mentioned, Ron led Neptune Orient Lines as CEO and spent decades in senior leadership roles across our industry. Now, the CEO of FlexiVan, he's expanding the company's smart chassis fleet to more than 75,000 units. Most importantly, I'm honored to call him a personal friend, having worked for and with Ron for over a quarter century. Thanks for coming here to the studio, Ron. You may remember this as the conference room where negotiations were centered with the City of Los Angeles and APL for Pier 300.
Yes, well, it's a pleasure to be here. Always great to see you. And it was. I mean, it was a unique.
And it was iconic people like Mayor Tom Bradley and General Manager Easy Birds that helped set the tone for that expansion.
Yeah, exactly so. The mayor probably didn't get engaged in all of the agreements that were done within the Port of LA, but this was a very important one, and it was important to him. And this was towards the end of his tenure as mayor, so it was quite an experience.
That is a slice of history. The longest serving mayor in Los Angeles with 20 years of service. Amazing. Let's start off talking about the Middle East. A lot of information is out there, and not many have been on the ground working or leading organizations. You actually hired me for a job in Dubai that spanned 22 countries for both the liner and logistics businesses of APL. And designing networks was your key to really developing the company. What are you seeing right now, and how is this impact going to maybe spill over to other trades?
Yeah. Well, we've never seen, an impact like this. My history goes back to serving in the Middle East through Fujairah, right? I mean, Dubai was a little bitty place, so it hadn't developed to this massive port that it is today. So if you recall in the 80s, the Iran-Iraq war, right? The Upper Gulf, mining, oil facilities being destroyed, I mean, an all-out war. That didn't have the kind of disruption that we see today, right? And of course, the industry has evolved. Imagine Dubai, Jebel Ali, the UAE handles 20 million TEUs a year. It's shut down. That's about the same volume as LA Long Beach. If you shut Southern California down completely for an undetermined period of time, the havoc that would cause. That begins to work. The good news, as you mentioned earlier, is that most of the services that operate into the U.S. don't start or have a touch point inside the Gulf. The same thing for Asia, Europe. It's mostly in the Middle East. It's regional impact. There is cargo volumes that move interport on ships, which maybe we talk about a little bit later. But the impact on fuel, the costs associated with that is gargantuan, right? So The uncertainty that was felt for a long time just magnifies, right? When is this in? How far does it go? It certainly is affecting the region broadly, not just inside the Persian Gulf.
Right. And the Arabian Gulf folks, think of the UAE, Bahrain, Kuwait. They're consuming public much like we are in the United States. So they're buying footwear and furniture, perishable commodities, and those have all stopped.
Yeah, well, I mean, you were there, so you understand this. Most people don't realize the supply chain for Iran is Dubai. Almost all the container traffic that goes into Iran with all of the merchandise, all the consumer goods, it's transshipped in Dubai. That's cut off. That's enormous impact on the population beyond all the sanctions and all the other things that the geopolitics has caused. Their supply chain is stopped.
So for small dhows, as we call them, the small boats that go across the Gulf, to container ships calling it Bandar Abbas port, all that ceased for right now, correct?
It's all ceased. So the total volume into the Gulf is about 30 million TEUs. So it's a lot of trade, and a lot of that was in motion. So there's carriers that had ships in motion with cargo. They're dropping that now in various places. So the transshipment locations that we're familiar with, Singapore, Colombo, Salalah, that was a regional hub, they begin to fill up. That has an impact on their utilization in the terminals. It impacts productivity. It has knock-on effects as far as how that affects vessel timing and bunching and those kinds of things, even though it doesn't directly affect the ships that are calling in LA.
Now, we've heard about insurance and caravans, U.S. Navy protection. Talking to senior leaders during TPM, first and foremost on their minds is, I'm not sending anything through the Strait of Hormuz because I don't want to put my crew at risk. The cargo, the assets, all secondary, but there's no amount of insurance right now that's going to have this thing open up, correct?
No, I mean, if you were responsible, if you were running one of those companies, you could not, in good conscience, send a ship through there.
Agreed. Now, the broader network effect of this, although we've classified it as a closed loop service that runs Asia to the Arabian Gulf, the Red Sea, and East Africa, as you said, there are going to be some knock-on effects. It's anyone's guess right now how long this lasts, but where are we with cargo piling up at factories and ports, and how much longer will we see, say, the Trans-Pacific trade move unimpeded?
Well, I think we'll see relatively soon some little impact on cargo. So the ship networks that operate all the way into the Middle East, as they're moving between the Gulf and India and Southeast Asia up to North Asia, those ships, which are dedicated to the Middle East service, all those interport legs are lifting cargo that might move for a ship that's in the Trans-Pacific. It might move from India to connect to a ship in Singapore that's an Asia-Europe ship. All that interport connectivity is also affected, right? So that will have some knock-on effect on cargo volume if this goes on for very much longer.
And talking to some of the port directors around the Asia region, trying to segregate that cargo or segment it right now is the task at hand, but you've only got so much space.
You only have so much space. And it doesn't take very long before these enormous ports like Singapore that handles, almost 40 million TEUs, it doesn't take too long before all of that interport cargo, all that transshipment cargo, which is about 85% of all of that volume, it's all connectivity, Middle East, India, Southeast Asia. It's trapped because it doesn't have the ship lift capacity to move it on to the next place.
Shifting over to trade policy. We saw a couple Fridays ago the Supreme Court decision on those IEEPA tariffs, the International Emergency Economic Powers Authority, that gave the administration sweeping ability to put taxes on American imports. Conversations around the shipping industry have been, I want to get in line for my refund. What's this going to do to my effective tariff rate? We heard last night Section 301 investigations have begun under the Trade Act. How is all this going to play out with seemingly a real lack of clarity?
Yeah. In spite of volumes all through last year being fairly strong, even in a tariff environment, the volumes remain surprisingly strong. But uncertainty, that word, that is what we ran into most with our customers. People had a need for assets to move their goods, but a reluctance to enter into longer-term contractual relationships, keep things short term, sometimes at a higher price, in order to keep optionality for what eventually comes. Mostly it's about, I just need to know. If I'm an importer, I don't know what my landed cost is. I mean, there's a knock-on to what the consumer demand is, but I don't know what my landed cost is. How much do I order when? All of those things have an impact all the way upstream, from the merchandising all the way to source goods that find their way into the manufacturing stream at origin. All of that is unsettled, and it's hard to see that that's going to change anytime soon.
Folks who observe us here in LA like to talk about all the retail goods that we bring in, but we have an equal amount of cargo that are parts and components for American factories. Just on Tuesday night, I was at Gentex in Grand Rapids. These are the folks that if you have a car in the United States, the rearview mirror likely came from Gentex out in Holland, Michigan. They had 300 suppliers at this meeting talking about exactly that. I buy plastics, glass, metal products from overseas, and I'm just trying to keep this flow steady, because if I shut down a factory line, that's millions of dollars in an hour, right? But they're spending a little bit more money. Hiring is soft. Capital investment is weaker than many would like. This planning horizon seems to have shrunk to a real minimum.
Yeah, and the good news is that supply chains are remarkably fluid, right? So the kind of friction that existed, COVID, even a bit pre-COVID, with all the things that happened and all of the all asset classes, doesn't matter what it is, chassis in our case, trucks, warehouses, everything, that has produced great fluidity in supply chain. That is conducive to being able to cope with some narrower planning horizons, as long as that exists, right? But it does present a problem if there's any hiccups within a system.
So do you think, compared to 5, even 10 years ago, a lot of people say, hey, we're resilient, whatever comes our way, we're going to handle it. Are we more nimble than we've been in the supply chain broadly?
I think so. And I think it's because there was so much investment that took place during COVID. Now there's an overhang, so if you're in the asset business, there tends to be too many assets for market demand. That's a different kind of a problem. But for people that are moving goods in and out of the U.S., generally a good thing, because you don't have that friction. Things turn relatively quickly. They're moving through warehouses. It's not just an international dynamic, but the problem during COVID is you couldn't get out the other side of the warehouse. So there was domestic impacts. Now the domestic flows are fluid as well. And the other part of that is information, right? So, with what the Port of LA has done, with the Port Optimizer, my business, we're ingesting 500 million chassis event data points annually. People have access to information that they never had before. They have the ability to plan better. That has an impact on execution, no doubt. All helpful relative to the fluidity in the supply chain.
Now, we don't have runaway inflation. The jobs market, while soft, has not fallen off the table. And GDP growth, save for the government shutdown in the fourth quarter, is moving along okay. Everybody's trying their level best. But we need some permanency in the policy. And while we talk a lot about, we're resilient, we'll handle the next unknown, sooner or later we're going to have to go on offense, because this business propels the U.S. economy.
Well, it does, and as much as trade policy has always been dynamic. It's not just this administration. This has been issues that we've dealt with. We've both spent a lot of time in Washington with these issues. When you disconnect import trade from export trade, you want to export everything that you possibly can to develop the U.S. economy. The ships are only so big. They come and they can only lift what they come with. If you choke off the inbound for all of the policy-related issues that attach to that, it limits the space that you have for export cargo leaving the U.S. And it's always been a challenge in dialogue with every administration to try to find a balance to that. And we've kind of swung a little bit in the direction of, all things that have a dampening effect on inbound, which unavoidably has an impact on what you can do in terms of export from the U.S.
And what we've tried to share with the administration, and keeping it simple so folks who have so much on their plate can remember, every 4 containers create a job here. across a wide variety of segments. Pumping up that export, as you rightly say, leads to better jobs. According to the Department of Labor, those export jobs on average pay 17% more than jobs in other segments. That really is the key, and I think folks across the country can understand that. So with all of this, what are you looking at over the next 6 to 12 months? What are you really paying attention to so FlexiVan and your associated companies can stay competitive?
Yeah, most of our energy goes into how can we improve levels of efficiency even further. A lot of that comes through data and visibility. Imagine a fairly simple chassis becomes a sensor array that develops supply chain information. It tells you something about your network. It tells you about the flow of your goods. It allows you to manage that in a more efficient way. That has implications to take out costs. So in a world where costs are generally rising, freight rates are going up, bunker cost, enormous increases in bunker cost. A person who's moving goods, a big retailer, there's parts of their network that they can affect to make it more efficient, to take cost out, because there's things that they can't do anything about.
Very interesting time, for sure. And this is precisely why we asked you to come here today. There's so much happening, and your experience, not only here in the U.S., but globally, is really additive to the journalists who've joined us today. So let's go back over to Philip and take some questions from the media.
Thank you, Gene. Fascinating conversation. So we've received a few questions in advance. We'll get to those, and I see a few questions coming into the chat box. So anyone else who'd like to do so, please use the Q&A box and include your name and affiliation. Ron, let's start with you from CNN's Vanessa Yurkovich. What is happening in the Middle East is being considered the largest oil disruption in history. Given your time in the industry, do you agree, and why? And I know you touched on this a little bit earlier. Maybe you can expand a little bit.
Okay, thanks, Philip. Yes, the example on the oil cost. I think yesterday the price of low sulfur fuel in Singapore was over $1,000 a ton. That's about $500 higher than it was. So a voyage of a ship round trip to LA from Asia is about 35 days, right? So that is almost $2 million in additional cost for every single ship within that rotation. An Asia-Europe ship, the difference in a fuel cost is over $3 million, right? So it is a significant effect. We've seen different things over time. Oil facilities that have been attacked for a variety of reasons, natural disasters and the like. Nothing that has caused this level of disruption. There is an effort underway, right, with the IMO to set global standards for emissions and alternative fuels that will, over the longer span of time, have an impact on cost and optionality for relative to where fuel supply can come from. But right now, and for the near term, supply is being constrained in various places in Asia. There are some ports that are unable to bunker at all for ships, and that is a significant impact on networks, not just a cost, but where you've got to take your ship to find the fuel to continue.
Now, we're a net exporter of energy here in the U.S., yet pricing is typically set on the global stage. Is there any way that we could play a role here, even in the intermediate time frame, to help out the industry?
Well, a challenge, but I mean, it is kind of happening today. My friend Vincent Clark at Maersk, they began thinking about the potential of shortages. They are now lifting more bunker than what their ship requires for its next leg. And some of that is in the U.S., where the supply is plentiful, and they're lifting more here and using that to fuel ships in Asia, where the supply is a bit tight. So there are some supply side capabilities. If you look at it on broader base, people tend to look at where's the oil being pumped out of the ground. Mm-hmm. That's an issue. But where the refining capacity is, right? So there's a challenge of developing more refining capacity to be able to produce more refined, and that's what is being burned in ships. They're not burning just the old nasty stuff that's left at the bottom of the barrel anymore. because of emissions controls. So they're burning refined. So where you have refining capacity, they're talking about more refining capacity being built in the U.S. Takes a long time with the environmental controls that exist to develop large-scale refining.
Good points.
Very good. A follow-up from Vanessa at CNN. This is for you, Gene. You had referenced that you don't expect much impact on cargo in the U.S. From the Middle East situation for now. Could that change longer term? And do you see this bunker fuel cost for containers ultimately being passed along to consumers?
Great questions, Vanessa. And from when we last talked 10 days ago, with the information we have right now, it's a pretty fluid situation. As Ron said, you've got some different segments of cargo that may start to get gummed up at ports overseas. For us, the Trans-Pacific trade is still the most lucrative in the shipping industry. A premium is put on these services by the shipping lines, the ports, importers, and exporters to keep those supply chains running. And here in Los Angeles, most of the 40 services that come our way are nonstop. So we right now don't see any of that congestion happening, but it just may. And no one has the answer at this point in time of how long this war is going to continue and for what duration the strait will remain closed. Those bunker prices effectively doubling right now are passed on almost immediately, and in some cases with a 30-day notice to shippers. They'll be passed on to the cost of those goods. The price at the pump is up over 60 cents since this war started and may continue to rise with the West Texas Intermediate today pushing $100 a barrel once again. Thanks, Vanessa.
Gene, this question has come up a few times in the last 24 hours. I want to put it out there. Stuart Churls from Freightways asking it today. The FBI has warned about possible drone attacks off the Southern California coast. What measures is the port taking to prepare for this possibility?
Stuart, great question and front and center for all of us. We put out wide-reaching notification last night that while we remain vigilant, and we're working with allied agencies, federal, state, and local level, those threats don't seem to have credibility at this juncture. Yet, eyes wide open, heads on a swivel every day. Our Public Safety Bureau, Port Police, led by Chief Tom Gazy, works those relationships very closely. The information that moves here through our Cybersecurity Center and Cybersecurity Operations Centers are continued to be funneled through the ISAC and ISOC in the city of Los Angeles up to the National Crime Center in Washington, D.C. Information is available and that collaboration continues. These ports, airports, utilities are soft targets for the bad guys, and there's not an hour that goes by that we take our eye off the ball. But we're only as good as that intel that continues to keep crossing our desks, and we'll remain out there. Just this afternoon, I sit on the Emergency Operations Board of the City of Los Angeles, which is convened by both the chiefs of LA Police and LA Fire. We'll have another important meeting this afternoon to make sure all of these 42 city agencies and the 4 million Angelinos that count on us are considered every single day. Thanks, Stuart. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Gene. I see several questions coming into the chat box, so we're going to try to get to all these. Ron, this question's to you from Stas Margaronis, American Journal of Transportation. Last year, the Trump administration successfully lobbied countries to prevent implementation of the IMO carbon emission pricing initiative that supported renewable fuel alternatives for shipping. With cuts in oil and gas supplies caused by this war, would the adoption of that measure de-risk global shipping from this kind of situation?
Yeah, Stas, MEPC 84, that's the next meeting of the IMO, takes place at the end of the month. The U.S. position paper that's submitted for that takes a pretty strong position. The U.S. is not supportive of any initiative that results in any kind of trading program, emissions, tax, fees of any kind. That's going to make it very difficult to implement a global standard. For shipping, whether it's environmental issues or others, having global standards levels the playing field for everybody. And that's what the industry has been working on for more than a decade and will continue to make that effort. In the longer term, the development of alternative fuel sources and methods would de-risk a bit the kinds of things that are happening today in the Gulf, for sure.
Thank you, Ron. This comes from Sue Yoon at ABC News. We'll put this out to Ron and/or Gene. How much U.S. fertilizer or feedstocks for fertilizers comes from the Persian Gulf? Natural gas, phosphates, etc.
Quite a bit. Aluminum, there's enormous aluminum production and fertilizers. Resin that goes into to plastics, it goes into the supply chains all over the world, but certainly in Asia. So important for what ultimately ends up in the U.S. and Europe, but goes into supply chains in different manufacturing centers across Asia before it finds its way here in many cases.
Now, Ron, you and I received some information from Dubai Ports World this week, a sit rep of what's going on across the Middle East and their views on activity in the supply chains. There is some talk and some witness to the fact that some cargo is moving across the road over Saudi Arabia to get down to places like Jeddah in order to get in and out of the region. But it seems like it's a pretty small percentage of the overall flows.
Yeah, I would think so. Fujairah and Corsican in the UAE is about 100 mile dray. So trucking into Dubai or into the UAE through those ports, both of which are not large ports, but they're they have substantial assets. Practical for some, not 20 million TEUs a year, but all the way down to Jeddah across Saudi Arabia, I'd expect that would be a tough haul. Even Salalah in Oman, you go down around the corner a little bit, that's 700 miles to get into the UAE, right? So for very critical stuff, for a limited amount of volume, reasonable, but not for sustaining normal operation.
Yeah, these workarounds are not simply turnkey.
No.
Thank you, Gene. This question is for you from Moses Yang of Phoenix Satellite Television. What impact do you think President Trump's planned visit to China in a few weeks will have on trade between the two countries?
Thanks, Moses. I think, number one, it's really important that the two leaders continue to keep talks moving forward so the world's two largest economies can continue to work with each other. But the difficulties remain, whether it's silicon computer chips to rare earths, tariffs and high prices. China continues to push exports throughout the world. They're only down here in the United States. They found other customers. There are other deals being made without us. We've talked a lot in this setting and in other public venues about soybeans, which are the single largest ag commodity that we export here in the United States. Soybeans to China last year were down 90%. Through the port of LA, down 80%. Brazil and Argentina have picked up the slack there. It's not a transactional business either. These contracts go into place 3, 6, 12 months at a time until the next bidding cycle will reappear. So hopefully at these meetings, I know that the staffs of both sides have been working. They're going to have to make some announcements, some positive steps forward. I continue to sit as an advisor on the U.S. Trade Representative Committee, and the encouragement that I'm hearing from staff and policymakers is that they're working diligently to try to come up with those small wins that keep these two countries at the table and trade flowing. Thanks, Moses.
Very good, and thanks to the folks adding questions to the box here. The next one is from Joe Moeller of Newsmax. Let's offer perhaps brief answers from both Ron and Gene. How long until you think ports in California and the U.S. are impacted by what's going on in the Middle East? Ron?
Significant impact, not really. I think the capacity that's deployed in the Trans-Pacific is actually up a little bit on a year-over-year basis. Ships in the Trans-Pacific are operating at almost 100% capacity in terms of utilization. So as we talked earlier, a little bit of softness with some of the interport cargo and some congestion at transshipment ports, but I don't think you're going to see a significant impact on the West Coast.
I would agree.
Very good. Paul Facey from CBS News. This is for you, Gene. Given that there's been so much uncertainty in the industry right now, do you think that this will result in more importers holding off on shipments?
I don't know that it has a direct impact on U.S. importers holding off, but again, this uncertainty, this very narrow planning horizon that we talked about, means that we're not going to go out and hire a bunch of people at company A, B, or C. The capital investment is relatively low, and as I've shared before, we still have over 400,000 manufacturing jobs open in the country, according to Jay Timmons of the National Association of Manufacturers. And the other key stat I look at is the number of jobs open across the country. It's down to about 6 million positions. You may remember that coming out of COVID, we were up to 11 and 12 million job openings, with the employee seemingly in the driver's seat to negotiate good salaries. That seems to have changed as well. We're still buying, and that word resilient comes to mind with the American consumer, which accounts for 70% of our GDP. The American factories, as my witness in Michigan this week, are continuing to move. The automobile folks are a little bit more optimistic than they've been, even though they're grappling with the impacts of tariffs. So I don't see our economy falling off a cliff. I don't see our buying patterns doing the same. It just may not move as quickly as we would like. Everybody's working really hard, but some of these impediments will not allow us to really kick in this economy to the next gear.
Very good.
Thanks, Paul.
Let's see. Looks like we've got about 3 or 4 more questions. Let's take one from, excuse me here. Let's go to Bill Mongaluzzo, Journal of Commerce, for Gene. Gene, according to the Port Optimizer, the Los Angeles in the coming 2 weeks is scheduled to receive 70,000 to 73,000 TEUs of imports during this post-Lunar New Year lull. When do you expect imports to return to more normal levels of about 100,000 each week?
Well, this is one area, Bill, that has been fairly predictable, and we began talking in the fourth quarter about what purchase orders looked like in Asia for imports and what the planning horizon was specifically for ship deployment. So coming off of Lunar New Year, which was officially February the 17th, we normally see that cargo land here by the first week of March. So here in the month of March, there are 17 canceled or voided sailings. Again, pretty natural. For the first quarter, we're projecting that we'll be down in mid-single digits compared to a very elevated Q1 last year. Again, nothing really dropping off a cliff, but predictable from the standpoint that following the week-long holiday in Asia, you'll see lighter cargo flows. The purchase orders for the spring fashion, summer fashion, and some inventory replenishment are not being canceled right now due to the events in the Middle East or any other economic reason. That's a very good sign. So we'll probably touch that important 6-digit threshold, 100,000 TEUs per week on the import side, give or take by May. We're out there hustling for every pound of cargo we can get here in Los Angeles, led by Mike DiBernardo and our sales team. But we're also seeing a few more services coming back to us in Q2. So we'll ramp up for that second quarter, and then we'll see what Q3, that traditional peak season, looks like from a PO standpoint. Thanks for the question, Bill.
Thank you, Gene. For Ron and Gene, from Jeff Berman, Logistics Management, if Congress does not extend the 10% Section 122 tariffs after the 150-day expiration in late July, how would that impact volumes and freight flow? Ron?
Yes. Well, I think the administration has a number of mechanisms that they're working very diligently on, no doubt. That gives them alternative capabilities relative to tariffs and duties. It would be a surprise for me, personally, if 150 days comes and goes and they haven't been able to work their way through those investigations and issue new tariffs on goods. So it would be a wonderful thing. If they went away completely, it's hard to say.
Yeah, Jeff, it was good to see you last week at TPM, albeit very briefly with so many delegates in town. I agree with Ron on this as well. Interestingly enough, the early winners coming out of this Supreme Court ruling, India and Brazil, who had very high tariffs due to these ongoing negotiations and rifts about other topics. The effective tariff rate for China has come down by a few percentage points, and the administration has been very clear that they'll look for other ways to put tariffs on products and use that as negotiating tactics to advance their trade policy and investment strategies. So more to come on this. But again, the CEO of a company today is wondering, What will that effective tariff rate be come peak season when I'm buying most of my products? And the family-owned business that's bringing in holiday toys that has a 6-week peak season to pay all their bills and get their products to market is anxiously waiting the outcome of this discussion. Thanks, Jeff.
Very good. It looks like we have 3 questions left in the Q&A box. We'll try to get to them quickly here. Jean Rena Lee from China Daily USA. The ongoing conflicts in the Middle East have disrupted major shipping routes. From your perspective, how significant has this situation affected trans-Pacific trade flow, which you touched on, and shipping costs?
Well, we have a saying in the industry that capacity equals production minus interference. And while the Middle East business for shipping lines and others around the supply chain accounts for anywhere from 8 to 12% of their portfolios, it is all consuming when it comes to making sure that staff and friends, family on the ground are safe. I was trading text messages with a buddy of mine in Dubai, Bashir Ahmed, the other day, just checking in, making sure he was okay. And he says, yeah, the direction from the local government is stay away from windows. If you don't have to go outside, please don't. But other than that, Gene, it's business as usual here. Well, that creates a lot of anxiety. So companies around this supply chain are spending a lot of time scenario building for that day when cargo can move, looking for workarounds, and the impacts these elevated costs of energy are going to have not only to their company, but to their customers as well. So this is a pretty unique situation, to say the least. Many of us are glued to streaming and television news broadcasts of what's happening there every day, and it is a real distraction for those thousands of miles away trying to run their businesses. Thanks for the question, Brina. Appreciate it.
Ron, this question's for you from Alejandra Carranza of Supply Chain Dive. How would you describe the current market outlook for ocean freight? Is there anything specific shippers should be on the lookout for?
Yeah, Alejandra. Interesting thing, we support most of the large retail players in the U.S., retail, e-commerce. Their business has actually been fairly steady. So through all of this, tariffs, everything, it's been fairly steady. The consensus that came away from all of our engagement with our customers over the last few weeks in particular was consensus view that this year looks like flat, maybe down a itty bit. But no dramatic swings, in spite of all of the uncertainty and all of the stuff going on. Unless that progresses to something that really becomes, much more serious than what you see today.
Very good. It looks like this is the last question. Gene, it's from you. It's a follow-up from Stuart Churls of FreightWaves. Truck capacity is tightening everywhere but Southern California. Are there concerns that there will not be adequate drayage when imports grow in April? Drivers leave the business when it's fallow.
Yeah, Stuart, good question. It's something we watch very carefully, too. Ron and I were just looking at the morning stats for the port from the Port Optimizer, and the dwell times are really low, sub 3 days for both rail on dock and truck. 2/3 of our cargo moves in and out by truck. The turn times at both ports, Long Beach and Los Angeles, are under 60 minutes and have been that way for a while. We still need to drive them down to get more turns, but under 60 minutes for an extended period of time now, that's also progress. There are 20,000 truckers licensed to do business at the 2 ports. About 9,000 of those call at least once a week. We've got plenty of capacity, but we can't be dismissive. There's always some hitch in the supply chain that impacts the velocity of those trucks. And if these folks are waiting in long lines, they're going to go find work elsewhere where they can get more turns. So a really integral part of our business. But from all the stats and the discussions we have with Robert Loya at the Harbor Trucking Association, where there's more work to be done, still cargo's flowing pretty well today at both ports. Thanks, Stuart.
Very good. Ron and Gene, thank you. We've got all those questions in. Gene, back to you for some final thoughts.
This was such a treat. And having known each other for so long, it's like we're sitting talking shop. And I really, you got on a plane, and I know you're running back to the airport right after this, but I consider it a personal favor that you came here to share with the media and all our port customers what your views are today. Thank you.
Real pleasure, right? Thank you so much.
Lastly, I want to shift gears for just a moment and spotlight an important project now underway in our local port community of Wilmington. A few weeks ago, I joined federal, state, and local officials to break ground on a $152 million Avalon pedestrian bridge and promenade gateway project. Over the next 2 years, we'll transform 12 acres of industrial land into a beautifully landscaped community plaza. At the heart of this space will be a 380-foot pedestrian and bicycle bridge that will connect directly to the Wilmington waterfront promenade that we opened just back in 2024 during the Lunar New Year holiday. What makes this project special is that it's all about more than just building infrastructure. It's about giving Wilmington residents direct access to their own waterfront and creating spaces where the community can gather and connect. This is the third major project the port has built in Wilmington over the last dozen years, part of our decades-long investment here, and there's more to come. Wilmington will soon be home to the nation's first goods movement training facility, a partnership between the state of California, the Port of Los Angeles, the Pacific Maritime Association, and the International Longshore and Warehouse Union. When completed, over the next several years, this center will focus on reskilling and upskilling current workers and give us the ability to attract, recruit, and retain new folks to our industry. It also showcases our commitment to do just that, with a storefront and counselors that can help people of all ages and from all backgrounds connect with this great port. Like our other Wilmington investments, both the Avalon project and the training center reflect our commitment to people and place. For this new bridge and promenade, we held extensive community input meetings, and the final design captures what so many said was most important to them. All this work is possible because of our public access investment plan, created more than a decade ago to ensure port growth directly benefits our neighbors. Here's how it works. We dedicate 10% of our operating income to public access projects. We combine that with in-kind funding for operations, maintenance, and upkeep. Over the past 2 decades, the port has invested over $1 billion in our LA waterfront. Simply put, the more cargo we handle, the more we invest in our communities. In other words, as we grow economically, we also grow in accessibility, recreation, and local connection. That's what this Avalon Bridge and Promenade Gateway represents, our commitment to transform communities, improve lives, and create meaningful change, one project at a time. Thank you all for joining us today. We appreciate your time and look forward to seeing you back here again in April.